When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a kind one. It was the smile of a bridge that has held too much weight for too many years, finally feeling the last crack run through its center. A quiet, crumbling acceptance. The sound in my head wasn't her polite, firm words about needing space and family dynamics. It was the deafening silence of a question I had carried for 35 years, finally being answered. A question I had been too afraid to ask my own husband. Do you remember? Do you remember what I gave up for you? I looked at her, this bright, young woman who loved my son, and I saw myself. A younger version, full of a different kind of fire. And in that moment, I didn't see an enemy. I saw an echo. And echoes eventually fade if no one is there to hear them. So I smiled. I nodded. I packed a single suitcase. And as I closed the door to the home I helped build, the home where I raised my children, the home I shared with him, the strangest feeling came over me. It wasn't anger at her. It wasn't even sadness for myself. It was a vast, quiet loneliness for the woman I used to be. The one he fell in love with. The one he, and maybe even I, had forgotten. This is not just a story about leaving a house. This is the story of how I lost myself inside one. And how, sometimes, you have to be asked to leave, to finally find your way back home. And my name is Clara. And for as long as I can remember, I wanted to create. To make beautiful things with my hands. I grew up in a small town where the sky was wide, and the possibilities felt just as endless. My father was a carpenter, and his workshop was my cathedral. The smell of sawdust, the sound of a plane smoothing wood, the feeling of taking something raw and shaping it into a form of purpose and beauty. That was my first language. I met Robert in that workshop. He was a friend of my brother's, a quiet engineering student with careful hands and eyes that did not wander when I explained the difference between oak and cherry wood. He didn't just listen, he saw. He saw me. The me who sketched furniture designs on napkins, who talked about grain and joint and line. He called me his artist. He said my mind was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Our beginning was a simple, sweet story. Picnics where we'd talk for hours. Long walks where our dreams did the chatting. His dream was orderly, structured. A stable career, a home, a family. A life built on sure foundations. Mine was fluid. It was about expression. It was about the soul of a thing. We didn't see them as opposites then. We saw them as two different kinds of beautiful wood that, when joined properly, could create something strong enough to last a lifetime. We got married in my parents' backyard. I wore a simple dress and flowers in my hair. He wore a suit that was slightly too big. We promised each other everything. And we meant it. His career took off first. A brilliant offer in the city. It was an adventure. We rented a tiny apartment with big north-facing windows. Perfect light, I said, for a studio corner. We were a team. I took a job at a local library to help pay the bills, and every evening and weekend, my corner was my sanctuary. I built small pieces. A jewelry box inlaid with different woods, a slender hall table, a cradle for a friend's baby. Robert would come home, tired, and run his fingers over the smooth finish. "You have magic in your hands, Clara," he'd say. And I believed him. Then our son Michael was born. And my world, in the most wonderful and terrifying way, shrank and expanded all at once. The love was a tidal wave. The exhaustion was a deep, quiet sea. The studio corner gathered dust. The tools slept in their box. My creativity was poured into lullabies and pureed carrots and the endless, loving choreography of caring for a new life. Robert worked harder. He was providing, building that stable foundation he'd promised. I was so proud of him. When he came home late, I'd have a plate warm for him. I'd listen to his stories about projects and deadlines. My stories were about Michael's first smile, his first step. They felt smaller somehow, less important to the outside world. But Robert would smile and kiss my forehead. "You're doing the most important job of all," he'd say. And I believed that too. We bought a house. A proper house with a garden and room to grow. It was Robert's triumph. My project became the house itself. Painting walls, sanding floors, choosing fabrics. It was creation, but of a different sort. It was creation for us, for our unit. I told myself the furniture I dreamed of building could wait. The family needed a sofa first. They needed curtains. They needed a mother who was present, not covered in sawdust in a garage. The years, they have a way of passing like pages turning in a gentle breeze. You don't hear the sound until the book is half finished. Michael was joined by our daughter, Elena. My days became a symphony of school runs, homework, laundry, meals. The library job was gone. I was the commander of our home front. Robert was conquering the professional world. We were a perfect machine, or so it looked from the outside. We talked, of course. But our conversations changed. They were about mortgage rates and college funds, about teacher conferences and leaking faucets. We stopped talking about the soul of things. We talked about their function. We were a partnership. A successful, loving partnership. I would look at my hands, now more familiar with dish soap and gardening soil than would stain, and I'd feel a faint, distant ache. Like remembering a song whose melody you've forgotten, but I'd shake it off. This was the life we chose. This was the life we built together. My sacrifice wasn't a dramatic one. It was quiet. It was the slow setting aside of a dream for the reality of a love I cherished. I never thought of it as a sacrifice to him. I thought of it as my contribution to our dream. The house, the family, the life. I thought he could still see the artist. I thought, somewhere underneath the title of wife and mother, he still saw Clara. I was so very, very wrong. The first time I felt the crack, it was so small. A hairline fracture. It was a rainy Saturday. The children were teenagers, wrapped up in their own worlds. The house was quiet. I had been organizing the garage, and I found my old toolbox. Not the one with the hammers and screwdrivers, but my real toolbox. The one with my chisels, my hand planer, my carving tools. They were dull, a little rusted. A wave of nostalgia hit me so hard it was physical. I carried the box into the kitchen, where Robert was reading the paper. I set it on the table with a soft thud. "Look what I found," I said, my voice oddly bright. He looked over the top of his paper. He smiled, but it was a polite, distant smile. "Your old tools. We should clean out that garage one day." "I was thinking," I said, a flutter of excitement in my chest I hadn't felt in years. "Now that the kids are older, maybe I could clear out a space in the basement. Set up a little workshop again. Just for fun." He put the paper down, giving me his full attention. But his expression wasn't the one I remembered. It wasn't the look of awe for his artist. It was practicality. It was mild concern. "The basement is pretty damp, Clara. Not good for wood. And it's full of storage. Where would we put all the Christmas decorations? And your project stuff?" He said project stuff the way someone might say old magazines. "Besides, isn't your book club on Tuesdays? And you have the garden club and the volunteering." He listed my activities. The activities of the woman I had become. The curator of our home, the social secretary, the community figure. My excitement deflated. A slow, quiet leak. "I suppose," I said. "It was just a thought." He reached over and patted my hand. A kind, dismissive pat. "It's nice to have hobbies. Maybe you could take a pottery class at the community center? Something cleaner." Something cleaner. The words hung in the air. My beautiful, sacred mess of creation was now just a mess. An inconvenience. Something to be managed. I closed the toolbox. The click of the latch sounded so final. Pottery might be nice, I heard myself say. That was the first time. The first time I felt that the Clara he loved was a memory to him. A phase. A youthful eccentricity he'd outgrown. And assumed I had too. The cracks kept coming. Small, almost invisible things. We were at a dinner party for his work. A new, young architect was there, a woman with sharp glasses and a confident laugh. She was talking passionately about a public art installation she was designing, about the dialogue between form and space that I was captivated. It was a language I understood but hadn't spoken in so long. I leaned in. The choice of material is everything. I found myself saying, it's not just about look, it's about story. What does the material say before you even shape it? She turned to me, her eyes lighting up. Yes, exactly. You understand. Robert, who was beside me, chuckled. A warm, spousal chuckle. He put his arm around my shoulders. Don't get my wife started, he said, smiling at the table. She's the artistic one in the family. She used to build all sorts of things. Even made our first coffee table. Used to. The past tense was a gentle eraser. He nodded, staring at the road. It's great stuff. Very innovative. A different world from our practical old furniture. Huh. He laughed. He didn't get it. He no longer spoke the language. The bridge between our worlds hadn't just weakened. It had been quietly dismantled, plank by plank, over the years, and I hadn't even noticed the silence where the traffic of our shared understanding used to be. Then the children left. First Michael for university, then Elena. The house, the thing I had poured myself into for 2 decades, became an echo chamber. My purpose, which had been so clearly defined by their needs, suddenly retired. The architect looked at me with interest, but the moment was gone, redirected by Robert's affectionate dismissal. That's wonderful, she said kindly before turning back to talk shop with the other engineers. Later, in the car, I was quiet. You're quiet tonight, Robert said, squeezing my knee. Tired. I was just thinking, I said, about what that architect said. It reminded me of how I used to think. He nodded, staring at the road. It's great stuff. Very innovative. A different world from our practical old furniture. Huh. He laughed. He didn't get it. He no longer spoke the language. The bridge between our worlds hadn't just weakened. It had been quietly dismantled, plank by plank, over the years. And I hadn't even noticed the silence where the traffic of our shared understanding used to be. Then the children left. First Michael for university, then Elena. The house, the thing I had poured myself into for 2 decades, became an echo chamber. My purpose, which had been so clearly defined by their needs, suddenly retired. I floated. I tried to re-engage with Robert. But we were 2 planets in separate orbits, held together by long-established gravity, but no longer sharing an atmosphere. We should travel, I said one evening. Just the 2 of us. We always said we would. He looked up from his laptop. Travel is expensive, Clara. And, with my retirement planning, we need to be careful. Maybe a nice cruise later. Something all-inclusive, easy. Easy. Everything had to be easy now. Uncomplicated. My restless, creative spirit was a complication. The biggest crack came on our 35th wedding anniversary. The children came home. We had a lovely dinner. Elena, my perceptive daughter, gave me a gift. It was a beautiful, hardbound sketchbook and a set of exquisite drawing pencils. I remember you used to draw, Mom, she said. I thought you might like to start again. My eyes filled with tears. She remembered. My own daughter, who was a child when I put it all away, remembered. Robert looked at the gift, bemused. That's very thoughtful, sweetheart, he said to Elena. Then he turned to me, winking. Though I'm not sure where your mother will find the time. She's the busiest retired person I know. He meant it as a joke. A compliment even. See how vibrant and engaged my wife is. But it felt like a life sentence. It confirmed that in his mind, the space for me, for the real, creative me, was permanently, comfortably closed. Filled with the busyness of a life he understood. That night, lying beside him in the dark, listening to his steady breath, I asked the question in my mind for the first time. The question that had been forming for years. Robert, do you remember what I gave up for you? Do you see me at all? But the silence of the room was absolute. I didn't have the courage to break it. The turning point didn't come with a shout. It came with a phone call and a request that sounded like love. Michael, our son, was getting married. To Sarah, a wonderful, driven, intelligent woman. We adored her. She had a career in the city, her own apartment, her own fierce independence. She reminded me so much of myself. Or who I might have been. They got an apartment together, but it was small. They were saving for a house. Robert, ever the provider, ever the engineer with a solution, came up with a plan. They need to save, he announced one day. The housing market is impossible. Why don't they live here? With us. Just for a year or two. The house is too big for us anyway. They can have the upstairs. We'll help with the baby. Sarah was pregnant. It was a whirlwind. And in the glow of becoming grandparents, the idea seemed perfect. It felt like the family circle closing, a new generation under our roof. My empty nest floating found a new anchor, helping my son, welcoming my new daughter, preparing for a grandchild. I said yes with my whole heart. I dusted off my nesting instincts. I cleared rooms, painted a nursery, baked and cooked and prepared. It felt good to be needed in that concrete way again. They moved in, and for a while it was beautiful chaos. Laughter, shared meals, the excitement of the baby coming. Sarah was grateful, but I could see she was struggling. She was used to her own space, her own rhythm. She was trying to adjust to a new marriage, a pregnancy, and living with her in-laws. All at once, I tried so hard not to be an intrusive mother-in-law. I tried to be just helpful. But my help was my language. My love was in a cooked meal, a folded laundry, a cleaned kitchen. It was the only vocabulary of care I had. Fully mastered. I began to see the tension in Sarah's eyes. A slight stiffening when I'd rearranged the living room cushions. A tight smile when I'd ask what she wanted for dinner for the third day in a row. We were two women who loved the same man, trying to share a kingdom I had ruled for 30 years. It was an impossible, quiet war. And Robert was in heaven. His son was home. His family was under one roof. He saw none of the subtle currents between Sarah and me. He saw a happy, full house. He'd come home and say, "Isn't this wonderful, Clara?" Just like old times. It wasn't like old times. It was a delicate, high-wire act. The baby came. A beautiful boy named Leo. And my heart exploded with a new, fierce love. But with the baby, the territory became even more fraught. Unsolicited advice, different parenting philosophies, the sheer intensity of a newborn. It all piled up. I saw Sarah getting thinner, more tired, her eyes holding a quiet desperation. I wanted to tell her I understood. I wanted to say, I know what it is to have your world shrink to 4 walls and the needs of a tiny human. But the words felt false. My path had been chosen with a different kind of pressure. Hers felt like an invasion. One afternoon it happened. The breaking point. Leo was crying. A sharp, pained cry from the nursery upstairs. I was in the kitchen. Sarah was in the shower. Without thinking, with a grandmother's reflex, I rushed upstairs. I picked up my grandson, rocked him, felt his forehead. He was warm. I was murmuring to him, checking his diaper, when the bathroom door opened. Sarah stood there, hair wet, a towel around her. She saw me holding her son, and something in her face just snapped. "Could you please put him down?" Her voice was ice. Quiet, controlled, but trembling with a fury I had never heard. "Sarah, he's feverish, I said put him down. She walked over and took Leo from my arms. The transfer was cold, final. "He's fine. He's teething. I have it under control." "I was only trying to help," I said, my voice small, my own defensiveness rising. "I know you are." She took a deep breath, looking not at me, but at the wall behind me. "Clara, you are always trying to help. And I am so grateful. But this is my son. This is my family. I need to do this. I need to make my own mistakes. I need to have my own space to figure it out." Tears were in her eyes now. "You have done so much. This beautiful home. Raising Michael. You sacrificed so much. I see that." Her words should have been a bomb, but they felt like an accusation. Then she said the thing that changed everything. "But I don't want to live inside your sacrifice. I don't want my marriage to be managed. I don't want my motherhood to be a role you've already perfected. I need it to be mine. And I can't do that here." She looked at me then, her gaze direct, pained, but clear. "I think I think it would be best for everyone if you and Robert thought about maybe finding a smaller place for yourselves. There it was. The request. The eviction. Delivered with love, with pain, but with absolute clarity. The world narrowed to the hallway, to her face, to the weight of her words. I don't want to live inside your sacrifice. And in that moment, I didn't see my daughter-in-law asking me to leave. I saw a mirror. I saw myself, 35 years ago, full of my own dreams, my own creative fire, looking at a life path that was loving and good, but not entirely mine. I saw myself accepting, adjusting, pouring my creativity into the shape of a family instead of the shape of my own soul. I had built a beautiful cage of love. And now, a bird who still knew how to fly was telling me the door was open, and that I was the one who had forgotten I had wings. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just felt a profound, devastating understanding that I smiled. That sad, crumbling smile. Okay, Sarah, I said, my voice strangely calm. I understand. I walked downstairs. Robert was in his armchair, reading. He looked up, smiling. Everything all right? I heard the baby. I looked at him. My husband. The man whose dream I had helped build, brick by brick, year by year. The man who no longer saw the blueprint of the woman he married. Robert, I said. We need to talk. Telling Robert was the hardest conversation of my life. He was confused, then hurt, then angry, not at Sarah, but at the situation. This is our home. They can't ask us to leave. We're helping them. After all we've done. I listened to him list our contributions. The free rent, the home-cooked meals, the babysitting. He saw it as a ledger sheet and we were in credit. He couldn't see the emotional currency that was bankrupting his son's new family. It's not about what we've done, Robert, I said, my voice tired. It's about what they need to do for themselves. She needs to be the woman of her own house. And what about you? He shot back, frustrated. You're the woman of this house. Don't you want to be here for your grandson? The question hung in the air. And for the first time, I answered honestly, not as his wife, but as Clara. I do, I said softly. But not like this. Not as a guest in my own home. Not as a manager of their lives. I've done that. I've spent my life managing a home. I'm tired, Robert. He stared at me, baffled. My tiredness was a language he didn't speak. We found a small apartment. A modern, clean, two-bedroom place in a quiet complex. It had no history, no memories in the walls. It felt sterile. To Robert, it was a defeat. A downsizing. To me, it was a terrifying blank page. The day we moved, the house was a tomb of quiet grief. Michael couldn't look me in the eye, racked with guilt. Sarah helped pack, her movements stiff with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Little Leo, oblivious, crawled around the boxes. I went room by room, saying goodbye. To the kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals. To the living room where we'd opened Christmas presents. To the hallway where I'd measured the children's heights. And finally, to our bedroom. I stood there, and the wave of it all finally hit me. Not the loss of the house, but the loss of the life I had defined myself by. It was over. The performance had ended. And I had no idea who I was without the role. The first month in the apartment was the darkest time. Robert was sullen, buried in the television, mourning his kingdom. I wandered the empty, echoing rooms. The silence was different here. It wasn't the busy silence of an empty nest waiting to be filled. It was the silence of a question demanding an answer. Who are you, Clara? One rain-soaked afternoon, I was unpacking the last box. It was labeled miscellaneous. At the bottom, wrapped in an old towel, I felt a familiar shape. I pulled it out. It was my old wooden mallet, the one my father gave me when I turned 18. The handle was worn smooth from my young hands. I held its weight. It felt like an artifact from another civilization that I sat on the floor of the empty second bedroom, the room meant to be a guest room or an office, and I just held it. And I cried. I cried for the young woman full of sawdust and dreams. I cried for the mother, who gave everything. I cried for the wife who became a comfortable fixture. I cried until there were no tears left. And when I was done, my eyes fell on the box again. Inside, I saw a corner of the sketchbook Elena had given me. The one I had never opened. I pulled it out. I opened it to the first pristine white page. And I started to draw. I didn't draw a piece of furniture. I just drew lines, shapes, the feeling of the mallet in my hand, the curve of a lonely window in our new apartment, the heavy, square sadness of Robert's armchair in the living room. It was clumsy. It was childlike. But it was a start. I didn't tell Robert. This was mine. My secret, my rebellion, my homecoming. Days turned into weeks. I would do the shopping, the cleaning, the cooking in a quiet days. But every afternoon for 1 hour, I would close the door to the spare room and I would draw. Or I would take the bus to the hardware store and just walk the aisles, feeling the wood, smelling the cut lumber. It was like visiting an old, forgotten friend. One day, I bought a small piece of pine, a piece of sandpaper, a tiny bottle of linseed oil. I brought it home like a thief with stolen treasure. Robert noticed a change. "You seem calmer," he said one evening over our quiet dinner. "I am," I said. And it was true. A part of me that had been frozen for decades was beginning, slowly, to thaw. The real turning point came 2 months later. It was our first wedding anniversary spent in the apartment. It felt hollow. Robert, trying, had bought me flowers and a card. It was sweet. It was the gesture of a man following a script written 40 years ago. After dinner, I went to the spare room. I had finished my first small project. It was a simple box. Just a small, lidded box, dovetailed together. The joints were imperfect. The finish was amateur. But I had made it. With these hands. From a thought to a tangible thing. I brought it out and set it on the coffee table. "What's this?" Robert asked, looking up from the news. "I made it," I said. My heart was pounding. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hands, his engineer's eyes examining the joints, the finish. He was quiet for a long time. "You made this?" he finally said. His voice was odd. "Yes." "When?" "Where?" "In the spare room. Over the last few weeks." He looked from the box to me, and in his eyes, I saw a flicker. Not of the proud husband from decades ago, but of confusion. And then, dawning slowly, a deep, unsettling realization. "You've been working in there?" he asked. "I've been creating in there," I corrected gently. He put the box down, carefully, as if it were glass. He stared at his hands. The silence stretched. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The timeline, the years, the dusty toolbox, the dismissed conversations. They used to. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with tears. Not sentimental tears. Tears of shock, of grief. "Clara," he whispered, his voice breaking. I forgot. 2 words. Just 2 words. They were the most honest words he had spoken to me in 20 years. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't try to explain. He stated a simple, devastating fact. I forgot. He forgot the artist. He forgot the dreamer. He forgot the core of the woman he married, because the wife and mother she became was so capable, so present, so perfectly fitted to the life he wanted, that the other parts seemed like decorations he could store away. He started to cry then, quiet, shaky sobs that came from a place of profound shame. "All these years. You were in here." He gestured to the box, to my hands, and I just kept asking you to pass the salt. I went to him. I sat beside him on the sofa. I took his hand, this man who was my history, my partner, my greatest love, and my deepest disappointment. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. But I said, "I forgot, too, Robert. I forgot to remind you. I forgot to make space for her. I thought loving you all was enough. I thought it was the same thing." We sat in the twilight of that sterile apartment, holding hands, crying for the years we had lost. Not the years together, but the years where we had lost each other. Where I had become a function in his life, and he had become the audience for a performance I never meant to give. It wasn't a happy ending. It was a raw, painful beginning of seeing each other again clearly for the first time in a very long time that we still live in the apartment. It is quieter than the old house. The silence is no longer an enemy. It is a space for me to think, to draw, to sometimes just sit and be Clara. Robert and I are learning a new language. It's slow. It's awkward. Sometimes we lapse back into old scripts, him talking about investments, me talking about a neighbor, and a quiet panic will flash in his eyes, as if he's scared of forgetting again. He'll stop himself. He'll ask, "What are you working on in your room?" And I'll tell him, not with the excitement of my youth, but with the steady voice of a woman reclaiming a piece of herself. I visit the old house often. I am Grandma Clara there. I bring cookies and hold my grandson. I kiss my son. I share coffee with Sarah, and now, our conversations are easier. We are two women in different chapters, no longer fighting over the same story. We are writing our own. Sometimes, when I'm in my room, my studio, I call it now, I look at my rough hands, the lines and scars from a life of love and labor. They are not the smooth hands of a young artist. They are the map of my journey. And now they are learning to create again. Not to build a home for others, but to rebuild a home for myself. Inside. The pain of loving a husband who forgot my sacrifice, that pain was real. It was a deep, silent ache that lived in my bones for years. But the greater tragedy would have been to live a whole life and forget the sacrifice myself. To never acknowledge the cost of my own choices. To die with that song still unsung. My story doesn't have a dramatic moral. I didn't leave my husband. I didn't become a famous woodworker. I am just a woman in her 60s, in a small apartment, learning to listen to a voice she muted long ago. The lesson, if there is one, is this. Love should not be a place where you disappear. It should be the place where you are most truly seen. And if you feel yourself fading, if you feel the essential parts of you being gently, lovingly boxed away, you must make noise. You must take up space. Even if it's just in a small, spare room. Even if it's just for 1 hour a day. Your dreams are not just for youth. Your soul does not have an expiration date. Sometimes, it takes a door closing behind you to finally see the window that has been in front of you all along. I am Clara. I am a wife, a mother, a grandmother. And I am an artist. It took me 35 years to say that last part out loud again. But I am here. I am remembering. And for the first time in a long, long time, it feels like coming home.